Welcome, friends. We are on section 12, that's page 33. And I have a title written in for this section. It's How Friends Encourage Each Other. So, let's see what they have to say about that.
Shall I start?
Sure.
Passages such as the ones quoted above help us gain a deeper understanding of the spiritual resources upon which we can all draw in generating and sustaining enthusiasm for service to the cause. Having reflected on these passages, we can now enter into a discussion on how friends encourage each other as they walk the path of service together. Listed below are some of the habits and patterns of conduct that might distinguish their interactions. For each, think of different situations you have encountered and briefly describe one or two that you would consider instances of encouragement. Try to think especially of situations in which one friend with more experience is working alongside another. As an assistance to you, examples for the first two below, based on the experience of the friends serving in different clusters, are provided. A. Noticing the smallest progress a friend has made in an act of service and speaking of it in a natural way within a larger context. When visiting a class a friend was teaching, a coordinator in the cluster noticed that the children recited prayers with ease and enthusiasm. Remembering that the teacher had initially been concerned about the difficulties the children face in this regard, she pointed out this seemingly small progress to her friend. They went on to talk about the blessings the habit of prayer brings to one's life.
Does anyone have another example that they want to bring up? I have on the side here that I interpreted these examples that we're going through as sort of a checklist for accompaniment. So this one is point out small specific successes. And I was thinking about how relevant that is to children, who are so encouraged when you praise them for even small things, or the whole language of virtues. I see you've used your patience today, as a way to sort of encourage them. And I think adults, we like to think that we don't respond as much, but I think we do. I like to hear any positive little thing that I can get. So it's good to share that with others.
The notes I've taken on here is the use of prayer that motivates me. But if people are social beings, there are very few people that can do things alone. And I think that's where accompanying in service comes into play. That if the motivation comes from prayer and the spiritual energy, you do have to have some people to go along with you at different stages in order to reinforce and maybe add more power to what you're doing.
No. Building on strength and resisting the urge to focus on weakness. An animator wishing to form a junior youth group for the first time did not know how to introduce the program to parents. All he would do was to approach a home and ask, "Do you have 12 years old here?" Knowing that he was more at ease with younger people, the coordinator decided to help him in his attempts to meet junior youth and established friendship with them. This assisted the animator in gaining confidence, and soon he was able to form a group. In time, he also learned to discuss the program with parents.
You see? Governing hope and optimism when a friend is facing difficulty and the fact of service.
Does anyone have an example? You've seen that be helpful.
What is it? What is it?
I think that's common to the human experience, because a moment of inspiration that gives you an idea regarding some sort of a project or whatever, but then doubts come in. And the doubts would perhaps remove much of the motivational energy if it wasn't for somebody there that is going to try to reignite your vision.
I mean, I think that's almost as helpful as sort of the practical things that you can do to help people improve their skills as being the emotional support as well. That's an essential part of the company.
And maybe instead of conveying hope and optimism, digging in and actually working with that individual in order to achieve. If you're doing it by yourself, it's rather scary, but if you do it with somebody else, then the fear is shared.
Those two
Which was the number D? Reflecting with a friend on the nature of his or her contributions, mindful not to elevate ego. It's always praising the positive, and all of these qualities that described in this passage is all taking the attitude of positive, that we will overcome. And here, of course, we will overcome collectively, not individually. This way, we are not egotistical.
So an example that comes to mind is
Appreciate, applaud people's doing things, the way they carry out their teaching work, their learning. It's amazing how much we can be around people, observe their behavior, and instead of being critical, you can appreciate and be positive what they do.
and I think it's helpful if people don't realize that what they're doing is really contributing.
Right.
It's important to put that in.
And maybe the importance of focusing in on results rather than things that would feed the self.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I scratched out ego and I put down self.
Right. Too much de-emphasization of ego, as though ego is very bad, but ego is part, we cannot escape it anyway, so just simply, don't stay on it. Instead of saying I say we.
We.
Yeah.
Listening attentively when a friend speaks of his or her experience.
This reminds me of the stories of how Abdul Baha listened. People who would come to him and, pour out their hearts. And, sometimes he wouldn't even need to respond. They would just know that he was completely focused on them and hearing them at a spiritual level. And they would, come away from the experience saying, he understood exactly what I was trying to, and even if there was probably a fair amount of language barrier there, they would say, I've never felt as listened to before.
But also listening to experiences will give you that necessary feedback that you could use for evaluation. And then the results of that, for continuous improvement or finding out the worthiness of that particular action.
Yeah. Specifically, I love to hear Peggy talking about her experiences. That's my concrete example for that one. So F.
And you know what? Probably these days, one of the big problems of the world is that people don't have the capacity to listen one to others. Each person or each wants just to say something in one direction that they believe, but no, the capacity to listen in my opinion, has been very impacted during these days.
There is social science backing that up. Most people, when you talk to those individuals, they're not listening for understanding, but they're thinking about a reply. So I think that falls into that. The statistics I've seen was like 70% of people that are engaged in any communication, the recipient of the discussion was not hearing for understanding, but they were thinking in terms of what can they do to reply.
In work environment, sometimes it's thinking of when someone's talking to you, you're thinking of how am I going to defend myself against this, because it can be kind of nasty in the corporate world sometimes, or any work situation, or any kind of interaction.
But I think that's the kind of conversation that's modeled for us on television as well, this conflict model. So people aren't willing to have their opinions changed.
Well, it's also, from my experience in a large organization, is the higher level people are the ones who are listened to. The lower level, they may say they're trying to elicit your input, but they aren't really listening. They're just going through a certain motion to try to show how they are so good to allow you to talk.
Yes.
Okay, F, reinforcing the habit of identifying the spiritual principles relevant to each situation.
By putting things in the area of virtues and knowing that conflict comes when there are behaviors in opposition to those virtues. You can see where that would be a way in which to get to the root solution of conflict.
I think it also elevates any situation because we can get very into details, very too down to earth. We need to remember that there are always spiritual principles that can be applied in the situation.
communicating to a friend confidence in the ever-present assistance vouchsafed by the concourse on high. Communicating to a friend confidence in the ever-present assistance vouchsafed by the concourse on high.
I'm reminded of the way Anne Perry starts every rehearsal by calling on names of the departed Baha'is, George Thompson, and all the early pioneers. I think this probably comes up, at least for me, just being confident that in a situation where you might not have the words to, you might be worried about not having the words to talk to someone about the faith. It's just being reminded that the concourse is there with you and will give you the words when you need them.
This is a realization that in everything we do, we are not alone. This is very hard to grasp because we keep forgetting that. And why we don't depressed and lonely, because we are alone and nobody is there. And you're like a experiment that they're seeing us like in the behind a one-way mirror. You see everything you're doing, and you think you're lonely. And just when you turn around to the glass and say, "Come on, give me a hand. I need you."
I like
Yeah.
that.
Well, there's an old saying that seeing is believing. But I think here on G, I think it addresses faith.
Right.
And with faith, you've got to believe it before you see it.
Yeah.
So in terms of communicating that to a friend, I don't think it's as simple as mentioning it to them as much as how do you get that individual to experience that on his own so that he would be able to believe that before he sees it.
Reminds me of my mother's experience. She was always getting help from the concourse on high all the time. And when she was alone, she used to travel a lot. And here was in 60s. She was traveling going in the airport in Iran was on a tarmac. There was no this way that, modern. If you walk on the ground with your suitcase and everything else, and here she's alone with a couple of suitcases and couldn't speak a word of anything, and what she was doing, she was praying and talking to God. It says, "God, you see, I'm alone here. I don't know where I'm going, to Rome or some transferring thing," and she was talking to God like this. Suddenly, somebody taps on her shoulder, and she turns around. This 6'4", 6'2" German, fellow, and he says, "I'm here. I can help you in Farsi, perfect." So you got herself a guide right away.
Good thing she was praying out loud. Great.
Next one.
Helping a friend to avoid feelings of disappointment when results do not match initial expectations, and to take joy instead from the act of service itself.
This is critical, right? Because there are so many times when there are setbacks And if you stop there, it's not going to succeed, whatever effort you're trying for. So just reminding each other that it's temporary and we can move forward. And that they're just doing it. You're doing it to serve and not to have results. And I was thinking about in our devotions, the three houses that are doing devotions, there are times when, it's just the three of us.
Mhm.
And that's not a disappointment, because we know that we just want to serve. We want to offer this to the wider community. And, even if we invited folks we know, they don't come, it doesn't matter, because even the invitation in itself is a success, because maybe you've had the opportunity to mention the faith, to talk about the concept of prayer and community. So, so that kind of encouragement.
Well, this reminds me of a, I think, very interesting case where that invitation I'm talking about, historically, this took place in 1950s. The Prime Minister of Britain, Anthony Eden, came to Egypt to solve, the issues, good relationship with the Egyptians, so they would have better relation. And he spoke fluently Arabic, and they sent invitation to Nasser, but they were not thorough information followed to explain what this gathering, this reception at the British Embassy was. So they were having wonderful, waiting for Nasser to come, and they were very excited to have him, and he walks in with his buddy, with his bunch of military people dressed in a military uniform, and did not know that this was and everybody was in tuxedos. So he felt that they were because they didn't tell him the details of this, they were trying to make fun of him or, intimidate him. And so he took it the wrong way. And consequently, he declared this Suez Canal, removed the Suez Canal, and a crisis began, just on the basis on the fact that he was made fun of. He didn't understand that. He could have probably dressed in his tuxedo and be fine among them and be able to talk Arabic and have a good time, but he felt it was like he was standing on display in a military uniform, and very awkward with all the people in tuxedo. It's amazing how a little bit of insensitivity have a huge consequence.
The Sylvania Baha'i community has partnered with the Sylvania United Church of Christ, and for 1 year, we've been working on having the first Sylvania Compassion Film Contest. And we laid out the infrastructure, we did the advanced planning, we were able to raise $800 of prize money. And the notice went out to at least 5,500 people in Northwestern Ohio, announcing the prize money, announced the categories, and it went to Toledo School for the Arts as well as Sylvania Schools in their arts department. It went to 550 artisans and filmmakers in Toledo, thinking that the prize money would be an inducement to try to enter. And we're 1 week before the drop dead date of the entrance, and nobody has signed up. So in terms of the disappointments and what is service to the cause, well, if we didn't do this, then of course that would have never been out there. But as a result, They're on Facebook. I think there's, over 350 likes on the idea. So,
And you built those connections.
Yep.
You now have experience
Yep.
on how to do this. And so probably some ideas about what to do, but, differently next time.
Maybe by next year, make it 1,600. Twice as much.
but we made a lot of excellent friends, throughout the entire process, and that's good.
Any idea why no one entered?
Yeah, I do. I think people would rather sit back and let somebody else do things rather than try to make the world better themselves.
Have people submitted for other contests?
It's interesting that maybe a year ago, the Multi-Faith Council tried to foster a contest in a different vein, but there was no takers. But they did not offer prize money, where we had a total of $800 of prize money to be given out, thinking that filmmakers would be able to at least have bragging rights, something to hang on a wall and a resume. But
So maybe it's not money, maybe personal connections.
I think that if this were New York City, or maybe San Francisco, where there's a very strong artistic community, I think it would be different, but certainly not the case in Toledo, Ohio.
No, there's a lot of, my understanding is there's a lot of artists.
First prize was $400, and you would think that that was a chunk of change. But, hey, I wouldn't mind that. But oh well.
All right.
Okay. Helping a friend to see a stumbling blocks a stepping stone to progress.
Do you know what the stumbling block is? No, right?
No, what is it?
Would you somebody explain to her what the stumbling?
Oh, yeah, so if there's a large stone in the road, you're walking
You
along,
cannot
you
pass.
just trip over it,
Um,
right? But the stepping stones is more like stairs, like you can use
Mhm.
a bunch of stones with stairs to climb over.
Putting the stone to better use.
In stumbling block is an expression of a
Mhm.
problem you're facing.
okay.
There aren't any huge stone left in the highway. They're all cleared up.
Which is a consequence of executing a plan.
Yeah.
When you have an idea and you start to execute the plans to solve that idea, you will obviously encounter challenges or conflicts that you literally have to overcome. And if you don't, then of course it gets back down to nothing is done. So it's an organizational challenge on how to solve those problems so that you continue on that pathway.
Several verses in the Bible and various books about stumbling blocks in the way of believers. They talk in terms of stumbling blocks specifically. So it's not an unknown concept as far as
What if the block
spiritual path.
is very unmovable and irremovable because it's so huge? What do you do then?
go around,
That's right.
tunnel under it, get a ladder.
And it's like a trial, right? So you can learn from it, you can grow from it. When I did this book before, someone in our group talked about he had invited a friend repeatedly to something, maybe a fireside, but this friend kept canceling. And then he realized he was getting really annoyed and that meant his motives were off, you know, he wasn't thinking about it right. So he just focused on getting active, just being of service. And at that point, the friend decided to come. So he learned, he got two things out of it. His friend was coming, but he also learned about himself. Are they also?
Continue. La I?
Oh, no, you did it, right?
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay, helping a friend see coherence between the spiritual and material dimensions of his or her life. What do you want an example? Just the you know, I personally, this is my personal belief, there's a really not fine distinction between material and spiritual part, but if they're so interrelated that if you separate them, I think the word coherence, I don't know, what do you understand of this?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Separate, you know,
Yeah.
I can't, if we start separating, we create a dual personality. And to me, it has to be the one continuum, whether you are on the material plane or you're on a spiritual path, you do the same thing.
Yeah, because we know that work
Yeah,
should be
right.
worship.
Work is worship, regardless if your worst job in the world, you're still praising and doing the job, and that you know removes you from the trappings.
You know, when I was looking at that, it reminded me of the March 1st letter from the Universal House of Justice. And the summary of that letter is the importance of actually walking the talk. In other words, embodying the same principles that Baha'u'llah has revealed to us. And going back to the page number 33, a deeper understanding of the spiritual resources upon which we can all draw in generating and sustaining enthusiasm for the service to the cause. The service to the cause is the cause of Baha'u'llah, as I understand it, is to bring in the kingdom of God on earth, rather than talk about it. And in terms of the coherence between the spiritual and material dimensions of the life, you know, how do you take these Baha'i principles and how do you embody them? And consequently, by one person's action, establish that kingdom of God on earth.
Conveying a vision of progress that takes into account the dialectic of crisis and victory. Dialectic being inquiry into metaphysical contradictions and their solutions.
So dialectic is defined as,
She just read it. Read
Yeah.
it again.
say it again.
Inquiry into metaphysical contradictions and their solutions. Does not give an example.
I had a conversation with Marie Yoder Dick's father-in-law, Rodney Dick's father. And he was a professor at Bluffton College at the time. And he was saying that if he were God, and if he wanted to plug into the human experience that would guarantee movement, it would be to instill a sense of pain. sense of pain would cause the movement of that individual one way or the other. And I'm thinking that, thinking about that, if everything were hunky-dory, if everything were okay, would we change? Or would a crisis cause some sort of reaction to it? And depending on our choice, which way to go, would that be the victory? So in terms of cause and effect, crisis and victory, they seem to be opposites, but one really aids the other.
Yeah, it's true. And we've seen that in the history of the faith. Covenant breaking, spurring greater unity in the community. So that's happened time and time again. And actually, I was thinking about our community. Would you say things are more active or about the same or less compared to when there was a assembly?
Personally, more active.
So it was kind of a crisis, but it spurred additional energy.
And then perhaps from my own point of view, and again, just me, it represents maybe a new plan of action. A new plan of action, and an action to the service to the cause.
Actually, a lack of assembly allows individual have less expectation and more demand for themselves. So there's nobody there to do anything for it. You gotta do it, or nothing will be done.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Also, I think in a small community, you have an LSA, your energies are directed in those matters. You only have so much energy available to you. So I think it's also a matter of, I'm trying to think of the term in physics, trying to, consumption of energy. I have to think about it. It's been a while. Yes, it's nice. So that people are freed up from the administrative affairs and they directed to other things, for good or bad. It's been good.
All right, so we're on L. Serving joyfully alongside a friend.
I put an underline under joyfully, and how is joy garnered?
I think in community, I think it is working with a friend. I think that's joy.
I think there's an initial step, however, is being able to recognize the joy that you're, this endeavor you're on, that you're feeling joy. Sometimes we don't stop and even think about it. You can feel joy just sitting and reading a nice story to a friend or whatever. But sometimes people don't even think about things in life that do enjoy. They just concentrate on bad things. Feel bad.
Joy is a state of being. And I think, from my own perception, I think it could also be confirmations. And the confirmations coming from the concourse on high. So by doing something, by interrelating with the people being affected, and then the joy that comes, it might be from the recipients receiving this, and it might be on that greater plane.
I can definitely see how that's really important for accompanying someone, is to help them enjoy the services.
Yeah.
John, would you continue?
Sure. Thus far, we have thought about the significance of encouragement as it relates to two friends who are pursuing a path of service together. We should now call to mind what we read in the first section of this unit, that such a path is not to be experienced by merely one or two individuals, but by scores upon scores, for it belongs to the community. This implies that the community, too, has to be concerned with the question of encouragement. It suggests that an environment has to be created in which every member is encouraged to serve to the best of his or her ability. This demand, in turn, vigilance on the part of all, if certain kinds of habits are not to form in the community inadvertently. Below are examples of such habits and tendencies. You may wish to identify a few more. The tendency to dwell on shortcomings, to criticize the smallest mistakes, to create too many rules, belittle the worth of an action by comparing it with another, bring up some negative experience from the past, whether enthusiasm starts to grow for a course of action, romanticize the ways of the past, yield to apathy and passivity.
Does anyone have any others?
That's plenty of negativity right there.
That's good. It is
That's
good.
enough.
So you can use, you turn them around, those can be guidelines for
Right,
what
the
to do.
opposite, you're right, right.
Yes.
So, backbiting is something else that can really drain encouragement. So, remembering to see other people's good side and focus on that is the antidote there.
Well, I had a couple things to add. One was reluctance to change. It seems to be a universal human trait.
But sometimes the reluctance to change is not a bad thing, because if you are, say, among the drug addicts and you are healthy, you're reluctant, you're not going to change your habit. So it's, by itself, is not a bad thing, you know. You keep your standard.
On the other hand, I've been on one meeting where we've never done it that way before.
Yeah, that's another, yeah.
Yeah. Another one might be feeling you need to be asked before you'll do something.
Mhm.
So developing our motivation and confidence that we can go out to do something on our own without being told to. It's important. Attachment to names and titles could be one. Someone doesn't have the title to do a job.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and the open-mindedness, being flexible.
Because each one of these points does have an opposite, and of course the opposite is to be preferred.
Mhm.
Any others?
Next. So, among the habits we all have to learn to avoid are those that breed paternalism as trait which both the individual and the community can possess. Care needs to be exercised then by every community if in the name of encouragement paternalism is not to become a characteristic of its culture. Paternalism begins with acts of encouragement but ends up disempowering people, disempowering people. Discuss in your group how this happens.
Several years ago, there was a book written by a Baha'i scholar called The Culture of Conflict. And he came up with a graph. And the graph pretty much aligns itself with society. And on the graph, on the top, you had power, and on the side, you have who has the power. And in the side, the power could be held singularly within one individual, or it could be shared. And in the power, you can use the power to create, build, and enhance, or you can have the power to overcome, to subdue, or suppress. And in each one of those quadrants, if you had one individual that had the power that wanted to suppress, then it would be a win-lose situation. The person that had the power wins, everybody else loses. If that power were to be used to suppress and keep down, but if it was held by a number of people, then you would have a lose-lose situation. You would have a point where nothing would get done. Ideally, it would be to where power is shared, but also where power is used to build, to enhance, to create, and that is what is being inferred here. That's how we get to that point. But the idea is that until we learn how to get to that quadrant, we're going to have to go through a learning step. And the learning step would be somebody that has the power, but is willing to share it for the purpose of learning by the group so that they can elevate to learn how to use it wisely and make good decisions where everybody benefits. The book was called The Culture of Conflict, and you can get it through to the bookstore. But it did the best synopsis regarding power and who holds it, and a way in which to use that power in which to get things done.
And in a way, accompaniment, that's what accompaniment is. It's not, you're not finding someone to do your work for you, to tell what to do, and then they'll do what you tell them to. It's being on an equal plane, sharing what knowledge you have, and then now there are two people with the power to start children's classes or whatever it is. So it's sharing. It's sharing that power.
Plus, it's away from this idea of paternalism.
In the economics world, there's more and more push towards having workplaces be cooperatives, both ownership and how they're run. And I think a lot come from just a reaction to the authoritarian workplace that most often find now, which can be paternalistic. Do it my way or the highway sort of thing. So I think it could be kind of people are responding to that new spirit in the world that we're all equal in the sights of God, although we may be in a different economic status or field or whatever. But everyone wants to at least feel like they're a part of the decision-making process to some extent or another.
I think one of the letter of the Universal House of Justice recently talked about this in terms of economics, world economics, that the developed world tends to look down on the third world and treat them as recipients of charity, and that's about it, right? And the House was saying, no, we should look at them as equals because they're human beings. They're of equal stature with us, and they need to be encouraged to help themselves. right? So, what's that phrase? Give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him to fish. It's set for a lifetime. So it's the communities that don't have enough need to find that empowerment within themselves. We need to stop this or with better behaviors, attitude. Right. Who's started?
Okay.
It's your turn.
It's not true.
You will find in Iceland beneficial to end this exploration into the nature of encouragement by reflecting of the following passage from a message dated 29 December 2015 addressed by the Universal House Hostess of the Conferences of the Continental Board of Council.
Of course, it is not the provision of training by itself that brings about progress. Efforts to build capacity fall short of arrangements are not swiftly made to accompany individuals into the arena of service. An adequate level of support extends far beyond encouraging work and preparing to take on an unfamiliar task. Working alongside a person with some experience increases consciousness of what is possible. An assurance of practical help can give a tentative venturer the courage to initiate an activity for the first time. Souls then advance their understanding together, humbly sharing the insights each possesses at a given moment and eagerly seeking to learn from fellow wayfarer on a path of service. Hesitation recedes and capacity develops to the point where an individual can carry out activities independently and in turn accompany others on the same path.
I think it's so cool that they came up with this book fast enough to be referring to December 2015
Yeah.
letter. Shows how important it is.
So really accompanying each other in sort of a, allows us to overcome the deficiencies or lack of confidence in achieving their goal.
What stuck out in my mind was that very first sentence about the need to not only build capacity, but to actually put into practice in the field of service what you've learned. You just can't do the study and that's it.
And it's so relevant to the Rui books, right? So many people just sort of breeze through all the books and say, oh, I'm done. And never actually, did
Yes.
a children's class. So our practice is accompanying each other when we get that.